This video is on Protestantism in America, and it's going to cover Martin Luther, John Calvin, Puritan ideals. First of all, let's talk about Martin Luther. He was an Augustinian monk who had concerns over the fact that religion and spiritual exercises were not getting him any closer to God. He was bothered by the monastic life. He was given an academic appointment and intense study of the scriptures, and he comes up with a system of religious belief known as Protestantism. And his goal was to challenge the teachings of the Catholic Church. He thinks that they are corrupt, especially the selling of indulgences, where if you give money to create buildings, mass will be said in your name and your ancestors in purgatory will be able to go to heaven faster. So it's kind of the idea of a Salvation Army bell worker for every European city in the 16th century to him. He writes his very famous 95 Theses, which is 95 reasons why indulgences are wrong. He nails it to a church door. It's then kind of like a public bulletin board. His Protestantism is based on three philosophical ideas. The first is called justification by faith, or faith alone. He believes that faith is what gets you into heaven. Justification is meant to be made right. How is one justified in the eyes of God? He says in the Catholic Church, it's through faith, teachings of the church, being a member of the church, the sacrament, participation, doing certain good deeds. He says, no, for Protestants, it's faith and belief alone. That's all you need. It's a very individual way to salvation. Luther challenges the Catholic Church and he puts power in the hands of the individual instead of the church and community, which is extremely powerful. The second is scripture alone. The question becomes, where does authority of God come from? Catholics say the Bible in Latin, and it needs to be interpreted by a priest and church tradition, so it's very authoritative. Luther says, no, the Bible alone is the authority. The goal is to translate the Bible into vernacular or a common language, publish it, and then let people read it. One Roman Catholic church today, there are hundreds of Protestant churches. So consider that what happens is a different interpretation and the forming of new communities, or what we call denominations today. There's almost a revolution of individualism, is a way that you could say it, and the idea that you could take salvation into your own hands. In addition, the third part is the priesthood of all believers. In the 16th century, 15 to 20% of Europe were clergy members. Luther says the way to God is not through these priests, but the fact that we are all priests. Later, people are going to use Protestantism to champion for equality, even though it's not true equality in Luther's time. But the idea is that we don't need a mediator. So once again, faith and belief is all that you need. Everyone should be able to read and interpret the Bible, and we are the ones that are making the decision. We are the priests. Next, we have John Calvin, who's going to expand on Luther's views to create Calvinism, which is another branch of Protestantism. This one is more important to the founding of America. He took it in a different direction. He is a lawyer and theologian from Switzerland, and his beliefs are centered around four different things. The sovereignty of God is the idea that God is in control of everything. He ordains every aspect of life, and we have no free will. We don't get to make any decisions for ourselves. The second, election, is the idea that God has chosen that some are saved, but the most of us are sinners who are destined to spend an eternity away from God. Third is the concept of predestination, that this is chosen before you are even born, whether you are saved or not. And fourth is total depravity, meaning that you cannot do anything to save yourself. So just kind of to repeat this idea, again, is that God is in complete control. He has already chosen who is going to heaven and who is not. It's chosen before you are born, and there's nothing you can do about it. Another example to use is in a non-Calvinist Protestant would think about salvation differently. If you fell into a pit, you called for God to help, he sends you a ladder and you climb out of it. However, if you're a Calvinist, you are stupid, you fell in, God brings you a ladder, climbs down, saves you. Again, the idea that you need God in order to intervene. And so this ideology is extremely influential on the founding of many of our American colonies. The Protestant Reformation in England, as well as other parts of Europe, Britain and France. In Britain and France, it's theological, but in Britain, it's also political. So Henry VIII married this Spaniard, Catherine of Aragon. Everyone is Catholic. He wants a divorce. The Pope says, no, you can't have a divorce. It's a sin. Europe is battling between popes and kings. He gets a divorce anyway. The Pope takes communion away from not just him, but the entire country of England. England decides in exchange to take the church, the Catholic Church, away from the Pope. So now the English have their own Catholic Church. They shut down monasteries. The king becomes the head of the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury is the religious leader. Henry marries the Protestant Anne Boleyn. His third marriage to Jane Seymour produces Edward VI. Henry dies when Edward is very young boy. Edward was raised by Calvinists, and Calvinist leaders transform England into a Protestant nation. Edward, however, is sickly and dies, and Mary is next in line. She's Catholic. Mary restores England to the Catholic Church because she's going to and persecutes the Calvinists. Then she dies. Next in line is Elizabeth. She kind of sees it the middle way is the best way and creates a new national church. It's Catholic in practice. There are priests, altars, and sacraments, but it's Protestant in theology. It's Episcopalian. It's also called the Church of England or the Anglican Church. There are two responses from the Church of England. The separatists are the individuals who believe the church was too corrupt. The Reformation hadn't gone far enough, and they could no longer be part of the Church of England at all. They're going to start their own services. They will be persecuted and geographically are going to flee to Holland, where they're going to create a more open and diverse society. These are the individuals who will eventually come to Plymouth, and there are 35 separatists in 1620 who come over on the Mayflower and establish the Plymouth colony. The reality is, though, that the majority of people that came on the Mayflower were not separatists. They were Puritans, but something that we often don't distinguish when we study about this in lower grade schools. The Puritans are theologically the same as separatists. They believe it was a sin to break away from the church, however. So they're going to work from within to reform it by getting rid of Catholic elements. And they will form the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So what was the allure of Calvinism if these individuals were predestined and most of them weren't going to go to heaven anyway? Well, it's hard for us in 2020 to understand the ideals of American individualism because that's what we know and that's what we are so used to, but they lived in a world of limits. And most people didn't have the idea of free will. Their worldview was very passive. Things were done to them, but they became extremely hard workers because you never knew if you had been chosen. And so you certainly didn't want to slack off in life for fear that God would change his mind and he would send someone else instead. So it was a really powerful reason to work hard and to prove that you did deserve to be elect. And this is what became known as the Protestant work ethic. And it's something that you still hear about today. There are several divisions of Calvinism that still exist, including Congregationalists, Presbyterians, although they have modified their theology today and are more reformed. Anything that is a reformed religion, there are lots of divisions that branch originally from Calvinism. John Winthrop, when he is coming to Massachusetts Bay Colony, he is the governor, and he designs that he says that we shall be a city upon a hill, the eyes of all people are upon us. His idea was that they would create this modern city, or this unique city that was a shining beacon, so pure, so biblical that everyone would want to go there and that they would be a model for everyone else. And he writes a sermon called The Model of Christian Charity, in which he writes this, that they would be a beacon for everyone else. And the structure of Puritan society is part of this, and we'll get more into how the Massachusetts Bay Colony is designed a little bit later. So now we have not only Calvinists, but we have Puritans as well, and there is going to be a little bit different aspect of Calvinism in America, and it's three parts. The first part is the idea of visible sainthood, and this is very important. In order to become a member of the church or congregation, you had to publicly testify that you had had a conversion experience, the idea that you had been saved. This is where you basically go out, you talk about how you've been saved, how you have a deep understanding of your own sinfulness, and it's preparing you to be able to be part of the elect that I had already mentioned. So visible sainthood is the idea, and the only way that you could become a member of the church itself is to have this conversion experience. Second is the idea of a societal covenant. Puritans believed that they were exceptional, chosen people. The idea of this permeates throughout United States history when we hear of the idea of American exceptionalism. We've always kind of thought of us as a special nation, and it comes from the Puritans with the idea that if they are doing what God has called them to do, then God will bless them. And if not, God will punish them. And to give you an example of this, there was an earthquake in 1729, and the first reaction of the Puritans is that it was a punishment from God. They didn't have any explanation of modern scientific manners. All they had was the pre modern ideas. Another thing that started happening was that there were Jeremiads, which is a name given to sermons to get people to convert. So they started seeing a decline in church membership and a need to get more members. And so they began to allow children who were were to be baptized as infants as a way to enter the church. And so you didn't actually have to be a visible saint in order to be allowed in as a child if you were baptized. And this became known as the halfway covenant and says that if you attend church, you could be baptized as a child, even if you're not a visible saint. This is ultimately going to serve to dilute the Puritan faith, but it is a way for them to continue to grow the religion at the time. And just a couple of paradoxes, which is something that appears to be contradictory, is that the Puritans want a Bible based Protestant society, but they also want it to be their way. Their idea is that it is their way that's correct and not anybody else's way. And so they can't really have a lot of deviation from their manner. In fact, they're going to throw out individuals such as Anne Hutchinson and Roger Williams from their society because they choose to interpret the Bible in a different manner. So that's going to be important to our next story. And then the Puritans came to escape persecution, but they're not going to allow religious freedom to anyone else. It's very similar to what I mentioned in Maryland with the Religious Toleration Act, of how they're offering religious tolerance to everybody that is willing to accept the Trinity of Jesus, but not to Catholics, not to Jews, except, or sorry, not to Jews. They do accept Catholics. They don't accept Jews or atheists. Same thing with the Puritans. As long as you're going to follow our Puritan religion, then you're free. And that's fine. But if you're not, you're going to have to go somewhere else, which is ironic considering how much they had been persecuted at home. And that is the end of this information on religion in the New England colonies. Thank you.